we, looking at the big picture, this is what we have going for us with the cold group. So if Satan is commandeering part of the cold group, sort of the bottom, scraping of the bottom of the barrel, Satan is occupying a portion of the cold group, not all of it, but a portion of the cold group. This is in my video. The cold group is divided into two groups. There's a portion of the cold group that fears God and will live on into the next era and will become our inheritance. Okay, so there's another portion of the cold group that will not live on into the next era. We can refer to that portion of the cold group as the beast. The beast is just an allegory for a group of people. The beast comes out of the sea, right? What does the sea represent in the Bible?
Nations.
Yeah. The waters, in Revelation chapter 17, the waters represent the peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. The sea represents as an allegory for the Gentiles. Where does the beast come from? He comes from the cold group. And the beast is just a subset of the cold group. It's a group of people that Satan is occupying. And remember in the parable of the salt, right? It says, what happens to the salt that loses its savor? It's cast out and trodden under foot of men. Trodden is an allegory for war. And the men that do the troddening is this subgroup of the cold group, the Gentiles, who are the beast, right? That they defeat the lukewarm group, so to speak, in Armageddon, or attempt to, okay? So Satan is occupying a portion of the cold group, and that's the beast. Now it says a house divided against itself cannot stand. So we talked about the hot group having a dual nature, the lukewarm group having a dual nature, the cold group. Now everybody in the cold group has a body, soul, and spirit, just like everybody in the lukewarm group and everybody in the hot group. Someone's spirit gives life to that person, right? It births their soul and gives life to their body. And if you read about it in Ecclesiastes, what happens when the person dies, their spirit returns to God from whence it came, right? So they have a spirit. It's not activated. It hasn't been birthed in the way that someone who's been born again has their spirit birthed. Okay, so a house divided against itself cannot stand. The cold group, they have everything that we have. It's just not configured the same. So what's going to be their dual nature? Kings and priests. What do the kings do? What are they involved with? Governance. What are the priests involved with? Reproduction. What happens when these two are at odds with each other?
War?
Yeah. When the kings and priests are divided against each other in the cold group, that system will be defeated. So we'll talk about some of the scriptures that go along with that. But let's look at this, first of all, with the big picture. So the lukewarm group is operating on the earth with all the power of the seed of the kingdom of God planted on the inside of them until they fall. And then they lose that. Okay? But they're operating as kings and priests on the earth. So we read this before. Let's go to Revelation chapter 18. I'm sorry, 17:18. Let's go to Revelation 17:18. We're developing the food chain here. I think we read this recently. Read it again.
The woman whom you saw is the great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth.
Okay. So, who do you think the great city is? The woman who's the great city. Which group is that?
The woman is group 1.
Okay. But in this case, just remember, just memorize this. In Revelation 17 and 18, the woman is the whore. It's the lukewarm group. Now, just because they're lukewarm, before they fall, they still retain that power that was bestowed on the woman to reign over the earth. So they reign over the kings of the earth. Who are the kings of the earth in this case, who the lukewarm whore is reigning over? That's going to be the cold group kings right here. So this is Revelation, the one we just read, Revelation 17, 18. The lukewarm group reigns over the kings of the earth. The lukewarm group reigns over the Gentiles, the cold group kings that are involved with governance. It's a hierarchy, right? So the kings of the earth, group 3, the cold group, the Gentiles, they're kings, they're involved with governance. Who's in charge of them? Well, the lukewarm are, even if we don't see that. But that's how this hierarchy is set up. We're just not fully aware of it. Just think about the Vatican, right? Reigning over, okay? So the kings of the earth are those from group 3, the cold group that are involved in governance. Cold group governance. I hope I'm not confusing you.
No, it's coming back. It's just I don't think it was fully developed in my mind before this.
Okay, so yeah, the whore reigns over the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth are the cold group that's involved with governance. Okay, but then there's also the portion of the kings of the earth that's involved with. This is kind of difficult here, but that's involved with reproduction. Now, I'm going to take a liberty here and put religion, although I did say that religion was governance. Without saying any specific forms of application of this, can you think of a system of kings and governance that could be at odds with another form of religious governance on the earth that could be divided? Can you think of what that might be?
Well, you already mentioned the Vatican, so I'm
okay, so it's not that. That's the lukewarm group. Now we're totally focused on the cold group. So the lukewarm group actually reigns over the kings of the earth, whether they're aware of it or not, or they do it or not, okay? But there are two different systems on the earth that are associated with the cold group. One begins with an I, and the other begins with the C. And they're at odds with one another. They're associated with this different dual nature of kings and priests. Let's go to the kings of the east. Let's go to Revelation 16:12. 16:12.
The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east.
Right. Without saying it, right? The kings of the east involved with governance. What's the other form of governance on the earth associated with the cold group? It begins with a C. Okay? So the C is against the I. And that's this system of division between kings and priests in the cold group. That's the division that we're going to cause the collapse of Satan's occupation. Okay, so the kings of the east, right, coming from the Orient, they practice C, and they're coming to the area around the Middle East, the crossing the Euphrates River, where they practice I. And they may not be divided against each other fully now, but at the demise of this system, they will be. You see? No pun intended. Okay, so let's move along. Let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about associated with this. Okay. We'll come back for part 2. Before we move on to talk about Revelation chapter 12, just want to make a note that when we were talking about in Galatians chapter 5 verses 16 and 17, we were talking about the fact that the spirit and the flesh were divided against each other in contradiction, right? Remember we mentioned that? Yeah, so that's the same. So what we're doing now is we're let's go back to that really quickly and read it.
Revelation 18.
Galatians 5, 16 and 17. Go ahead and read that again.
But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. For the flesh sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that please you.
Okay, so that's similar to what we read about where a house divided against itself cannot stand. It's the same thing here. So before dividing soul and spirit, essentially the flesh, which is the soul and the body, in toxic team up with each other, is divided against the spirit. They're contrary to one another. So we want to divide soul and spirit, but like we said before, that does not serve